Hello everyone, today we're talking about graphic novels and literacy. This is the student video, although both the teacher and student video probably could be viewed by both teachers and students and would be helpful. But the student video is going to focus specifically on the kind of critical reading you should do while reading graphic novels. So jumping right into analyzing graphic novels, I'm going to show you a few different things to keep in mind while reading graphic novels and analyzing them and reading them critically. And when I do, I'm going to show this little unlocked figure, and these will be questions to keep in mind while reading. If you're going to write down anything, I would say that these questions are the most important thing because you can keep them on hand while you're reading a graphic novel. So first thing to keep in mind is art and icons. So while some people think images are easier to read than words, and it may be true, especially simplistic cartoons, they are actually require more interpretation sometimes. So the simplistic style of graphic novels requires more interpretation than realistic art. I'll be using several examples and excerpts from Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. Here's one. So remember that the Prezi for this is available, so you can spend more time with these images if you need to, but I'm going to run through them pretty quickly. So Scott McCloud talks about how images are received information. You see a realistic image and it's pretty immediately put into your brain and you know what it means. Whereas words are a little more interpretive. You perceive what they are saying. You have to do interpretation to picture what's going on. Well, there are some ways that pictures can become more like words and words can become more like pictures. So when you move away from the realistic images and go to a more simplistic or cartoon-like image, you are becoming closer to an icon. Instead of seeing an image and knowing exactly what it is, that it's a picture of a person, it's a person, you have to do more interpretation. You have to interpret that this is a face. Now, we don't have any difficulty doing that, but it is because of the interpretive leaps our mind makes to interpret that as a face. Kind of like with words, when we see the word face, we automatically get a picture of a face. But if we get into heavier description, we have to do more interpretation. We have to picture it ourselves and get to it without the direct word face. So as words become more simplistic, they become more like images. And as images become more simplistic, they become more like words. They kind of combine in a graphic novel. So one thing to keep in mind while you're reading is that as you read, what interpretations do you have to make from the abstracted images? The fact that the images are not necessarily realistic means you have to interpret. So what interpretations are you making, and how do you make those interpretations? What about the art itself gives you those interpretations? Next, panels and gutters. So panels are kind of the bounded images, and gutters are the space in between the panels. And they're used to move us through the graphic novel, and often chronological order, but it could also be spatial or lots of other things. So how do these work, and how do we interpret meaning from them? So again, Scott McCloud shows how panels kind of fracture, and they don't show us every single thing going on as, say, maybe a movie would. But having the gutters, having the space between, allows us to practice what he calls closure. So the idea is we kind of close the spaces in between and connect them in our mind. We mentally construct a continuous, unified reality. So there's lots of interpretation going in to filling in the gaps between the images. Here are some types of interpretations we might be making, and some types of gutters, interpretations and spaces in between. So there's moment to moment, which doesn't require a lot of interpretation. It's just kind of like slowing down a movie in one frame at a time. Then there's action to action, kind of like this one, where it just leaves out a lot in the middle but shows two actions. Subject to subject, it might be the same moment of time instead of chronological like these two, but it is showing two different subjects in that moment of time. Scene to scene jumps pretty fast from one place to another place. Now it could be a jump in time and space, so it's obviously a jump in space if it's a jump from scene to scene, but it could also be going in the future, but it could just be the exact same moment but two different places. Aspect to aspect, so we could have one large image, but it's divided into panels, so we focus on different aspects. And then we have non sequitur, which means it does not follow. We have one image and a seemingly totally unrelated image. However, putting those two images together, that juxtaposition, causes some sort of meaning to be made by them two together. So we have to think about what that is. So what are you having to interpret between panels as you're reading? And how do those panels set up the pacing of the graphic novel? How would this pacing be created in a traditional novel or even in a movie? Think about what kinds of interpretations you're making in between those panels. Next, lines, color, and emotion. I'm going to take this a lot from a certain book. So this is taken from Picture This, How Pictures Work by Molly Bang. And I'm basically going to go through and show you the story of Little Red Riding Hood, but using only basic lines, shapes, colors, and space. So first, we have Little Red Riding Hood and her mother. We can tell it's her mother because she's bigger. She's a looming figure over her. But we could make her a little more motherly by curving her lines. We could make her even more so by calming her color. So notice these harsh lines. We don't exactly get the image of mother, but when we soften and lighten, we get that soft, comforting idea of mother. So she gives Little Red Riding Hood the basket. And now we are in the forest, and these harsh, sharp, vertical lines are pretty scary trees. The dark color also helps with this scary image. These vertical lines, these looming lines up kind of above here, are also scary. Our Little Red Riding Hood is cowering at the bottom being a place where she feels threatened. And she gets smaller and smaller as she goes deep into these woods. And then we have even scarier diagonal lines show tension. And then the wolf appears. But notice, if we soften the wolf, he is no longer that scary. It is not until we have these harsh, jagged lines that he's really scary. Ooh, our dark eye. But even scarier, our red eye, even though that tongue seems a little silly. And then our dark mood here. So we're getting a lot. We're getting, in these simple shapes and colors, we have a main character, we have tension and danger from the looming tall trees. We have the sharp, jagged lines of a threat. So you may want to pause the video because I'm going to go through these really quickly, but you might want to spend a little more time with them, possibly write them down. But you can see from those images that smooth, flat, horizontal shapes equal stability and calm. Vertical and diagonal shapes are excitement, motion, tension. Upper half is freedom, happiness. Bottom half is threatened, heavy, sad. The center of the page is a center of attention. Light backgrounds feel safe, while dark backgrounds do not. We feel comforted looking at round shapes and scared looking at pointed, jagged shapes. And the larger the object is, the stronger it feels. All of these are kind of obvious or intuitive, but it's not until we start to look at these things in graphic novels that we can really unlock some thoughts about these images. So one thing to think about, how are these rules used to convey meaning in the graphic novel that you are reading? And then finally, words and pictures, how they work together. So that's what's unique about graphic novel. it's a combination of words and pictures. So you're doing the interpretive work you normally have to do with words, but you're also adding another dimension of interpreting images, and then you're adding a third dimension, which is having to combine them together in this multimodal idea. So Scott McCloud has some ideas on that, how words and images work together. So you can see these different ways that words and pictures can combine. This first one is word specific. So the words are there, but the words are the main thing. The images just kind of illustrate what's happening. Or you could be picture specific, where it's really the pictures that shows what's going on and the words just kind of add a soundtrack. Or you could have duo specific. Basically, the words and the pictures show the exact same thing. But there are some more. So you can have additive. In additive panels, the words elaborate on what's going on in the image, or the image elaborates on what's going on in the words. You kind of get something different from each. Parallel is interesting. They kind of don't go along, so the words don't really match what's going on in the pictures. So you're seeing one thing happening in the images and interpreting that, but you're having to reconcile it with something different happening in the words. And finally, a montage where the words and the images are kind of together. They're merged together, and the words are the image. Again, you can spend more time on this if you look at the Prezi in the link. You can zoom in and read these more closely. So, in what ways do words and pictures interact to create meaning? That is one of the most important things about reading a graphic novel, is figuring out that interaction. That's where the words enhance the pictures and the pictures enhance the words, and you're doing extra work than if you were just reading a traditional novel. So keep all of those things in mind as you are reading graphic novels to really be able to analyze them and critically read them as you would any other novel. Again, make sure to check out the Prezi in the link if you want to spend more time on any of these slides.